Gente, me cabe a honra, né, e a satisfação de apresentar o nosso convidado internacional que vai falar agora, P. Olav Vandvik. Ele é professor da Universidade de Oslo e é dos membros mais atuantes aí da colaboração, o Great Working Group.
Dear colleagues, great pleasure to be here in Brazil. And thanks, Reginaldo, for those kind words. I'm going to talk about some emerging new concepts and tools that I hope Brazil and you will make use of in the future. So it's actually an evidence ecosystem I'm going to present. And what I think are one of the main challenges now to really improve patient care worldwide is that we're working in silos. EBMers like us, clinicians, and quality improvers, and those involved in health IT are basically not talking to each other. Neither are the platforms. So I'm going to paint a pretty broad picture during this presentation. We'll be moving to lunch at 12:45. There'll be room for some questions. And really it's about how do we bring best evidence to the point of care, to patients and clinicians, and through what we call a digital and trustworthy evidence ecosystem. So I represent this magic, Making Greater Irresistible Choice. It's a research and innovation project based in Norway with countries across partners across 10 countries. We're also a non-profit organization who has developed Magic app that I will present during this presentation. I have no financial conflict of interest, but might have some intellectual conflict of interest. I'll leave that for you to consider. And Gordon Guide is my mentor, one of the key guys, and a bunch of other good people involved in this project. I'm going to start out by a patient I met in my hospital. I'm an internist. This is a guy called Jon in Norway. He lives up in the mountains. He likes to fish. He has some diseases and uses quite a lot of drugs, but he seems happy. He was hospitalized in our hospital in September 2015 with a pneumonia. It's a quite severe pneumonia. He was having dyspnea and he was bedridden. He got IV antibiotics on the second day. And then I went around with a young resident physician. And after our rounds, she suggested I give him a short course of steroids. And that's not what we do typically with these patients with pneumonia. We don't give steroids, so I was skeptical. So there you go, it's a clinical question emerging at the point of care, do we give steroids in pneumonia? And in fact, this is the resident physician. She looked this up in her iPad and pointed me to a systematic review published in Annals of Internal Medicine 2015. Now, the picture I'm going to paint now is this evidence ecosystem. You could imagine if we have the systems right and the people and the processes and the tools, if there's a new trial on steroids, we would quickly summarize it into a systematic review, create recommendations and decision support tools, so actually clinicians and patients could discuss this at the point of care. And then you would also be able to evaluate, implement and evaluate in the EMR, for instance, if we actually improve care. That's what we're going to end up with during this presentation. We're going to take you through a long story before that. Make another jump. See if I'm actually able to click on this internet link. I'm not sure through this one. But in short, this is the systematic review that she showed me. And we now have the opportunity of clicking in these systematic reviews and finding what we call interactive summary finding tables. And Gabrielle is going to talk more about epistemologos and those tools, really showing huge progress in evidence-based practice. Because now you're going to discuss with your neighbor for a couple of minutes if you would want to take steroids, if these were the anticipated benefits and harms of this treatment. And I'm going to do it quick and dirty, not online, given the time and my lacking internet access to this little thing. Here's an interactive summary finding table for you. So it shows that in patients with pneumonia in hospitals, if you treat 1,000 patients for 7 to 10 days with prednisolone, 40 milligrams, what you achieve is the following. And pay attention because you're now going to imagine you're going to make this decision as a doctor or with your patient, and I will have a vote afterwards, how many would take it, how many would not, and how many would find it impossible to make up their mind in such a short time frame. Anyway, what we have is for mortality, 28 fewer per 1,000. Need of mechanical ventilation, 50 fewer. Admission to the ICU, 42 fewer. ARDS, which is severe respiratory failure, 50 fewer. Duration of hospitalization reduced by 1 day, as is time to clinical stability. No difference in readmission. All this at the cost of 35 more per 1,000 with hyperglycemia. No difference in GI hemorrhage, and 11 more per 1,000 with acute confusion. Moderate to high quality evidence. Our certainty in the effect estimates is moderate to high according to the grade system. So please now, with your neighbor, you've got 2 minutes, discuss, would you take this if these were our best estimates of effect? Go ahead. Okay, not very much time. So please, everyone, I'm very curious. You might have some questions about this evidence, but with that limitation, how many would want to take steroids if you were admitted with pneumonia? Hands up. And hi, please. And Reginald, you need to take a picture. He's taking pictures, good. Okay, how many would not want to take this? Higher. Very few. How many finds it impossible to decide in such a short time frame? Quite a few. Okay, so definitely the majority of this group would want to take steroids based on this evidence. Okay, we're moving on. Now, this is another patient. I'm going to come back to steroids and pneumonia, but this is another patient. And I called her Anna. It's a picture from Google. She has a painful knee. Not teach or do gymnastics. She's a teacher. Now, she insisted when meeting her GP that she had an MRI, which showed meniscal tears. And her GP found it better to suggest physiotherapy than surgery. But Anna clearly wants surgery because her friends have had surgery, arthroscopic surgery of the knee. Another clinical question, we need to find the answer. So looking at evidence-based medicine 2015, I think it's fair to say we made huge advances. The new user's guides to the medical literature reflects these advances. And on the front page, you have a tool where you could sit with your patient and discuss benefits and harms and treatments, which comes from the MAGIC project. And I'll show you examples of this now and more in detail tomorrow. At the Cochrane Colloquium, there's obvious that there's similar progress and a huge willingness to collaborate. So they're also moving into new tools, living systematic views. All this looks great. Now, how far have we come in Norway in terms of evidence-based practice? Look at meniscectomies. We have something called the National Health Atlas. This is Norwegian, so I don't expect you to understand it. But we published in Norway from the Directorate of Health results showing variation in healthcare. And they picked 12 different day surgery procedures. And this is meniscus surgery, and shows that on the west coast of Norway, there's fourfold higher frequency of these procedures compared to other places in Norway. So our health minister is really a good guy with a nice strategic approach. He says, you surgeons, you have to stop doing this. This is waste, and patients should not get this treatment. Now, the directors of the hospital trusts in Norway say, well, I actually think it's impossible to know what to do in this case. And so did many of the surgeons say. That really triggered me. I've heard something about meniscus surgery and new evidence, so I wanted to look into this, and I'll take you through what we now know about this particular treatment. And when I teach evidence-based practice, this is what I always do. I talk a little bit more about how I teach later, but I always teach clinicians starting out with clinical scenarios, finding answers, going through the steps of the evidence-based practice, asking questions in the PICO format, then searching for the best evidence. Traditional evidence-based practice is critical appraisal of papers. However, we need guidance. So that's why I increasingly teach how to find and use the best guidelines and also critically appraise up-to-date, for instance, for their trustworthiness. And then we create recommendations for groups of people. So you still have to apply those recommendations balanced in meetings with individual patients. This is really Evidence-Based Practice 2015. Now let's see what we can find if we go this circle. First, how good are we at answering such questions? And this is a systematic review of, I think, 7,000 questions, and the results are consistent and very, very informative, I think, because it turns out for every second patient we see, there's a new important clinical question that could change diagnosis or treatment of patients. Now, we only pursue half of those questions. And I think to us, this is the challenge we have to approach, and some of the comments in the former presentation alluded to the need of tools to actually find best evidence and make use of it. Now, some in the EBM community thinks we could do without guidelines. This is a recent trial we've done in 10 countries, soon to be published, showing a clear preference. So we now know what we know from before, but through evidence that clinicians want and need recommendations. So clear preference for recommendations compared to evidence summaries alone, even in the format as you've just seen them. In Norway, we have a national electronic health library, and I think we'll welcome this beautiful woman to come to Norway if you want, because we have come pretty far at the strategic level in Norway to allow clinicians to find all sorts of resources, and we could also do what we call a McMaster Plus pyramid search. So this is what I teach to clinicians. This is what many do. You enter meniscus surgery, and the meniscal tears and surgery, and you find results at each level of this knowledge pyramid, starting with the recommendations on top. Now in this case, actually, I did not find a trustworthy recommendation up to date or best practice. There's no national guidelines, so I have to move beyond that level or below and look at the best systematic reviews. So this all started out with a trial published in New England Journal of Medicine 2013, done by some good colleagues in Finland, actually done a placebo-controlled or sham surgery trial on this particular population of patients with meniscal tears. And what they found was important. No effect beyond placebo for the functional outcomes. This was summarized in a nice systematic review the year after, confirming that there's no important benefit to patients across all the trials. Again, published in the new systematic review in BMJ 2015. So this is why I say the directors of the hospital trust are wrong. We do know what the evidence is. There's no effect in these patients beyond placebo. Okay, so in Norway then, we would have to create a guideline or a recommendation for this particular question. And I'm going to take you through some of the advances for guidelines, and it's called Trustworthy Guidelines. From the Institute of Medicine, 2011. I love this report because they state some very important things for guidelines. The new definition requires that the recommendations are based on a systematic review of the best evidence, and then we also always have to assess the balance between benefits and harms. And then there are standards to make sure that, for instance, authors are up to date, and we can manage their conflicts of interest, etc. This is a huge progress in standards for guidelines. Also adopted by the Guideline International Network, and I'm part of the board in GIN, and these standards are the same. Very useful. In Norway, we have a guideline for guidelines, obviously, from the Directorate of Health, and it states that we should follow these standards. GRADE is the system, I think it's fair to say, which makes it most easy to meet many of these standards. So I'll take you through GRADE in one slide. How many knows GRADE from before? Hands up. Fantastic, should be another picture. This is world record. So you know that what we do is to, for a particular question, such as surgery, arthroscopic surgery for meniscal tears, we have the right people around the table. It should be multi-professional, should be patient representatives if we feel it's important. We ask PICO questions for the patient-important outcomes. We ditch the surrogate outcomes. We hunt for the best systematic reviews, and we summarize the results in evidence profiles or summary finding tables like the one you just saw at the beginning of this presentation. For each outcome, we have the absolute effects with our certainty in the effects. As you know, GRADE does it. Then, on the top, this is what we do for systematic reviews. So Cochrane is doing this. Lots of systematic reviews now come with GRADE assessments. Then we move from evidence to recommendations. So we look at the balance between benefits and harms in light of our certainty and effect estimates. We then think about what most patients would want, or most people, like you, most people here would want steroids for pneumonia. Well, that's informative if you're representative of the target population. And then what about cost? Well, prednisolone is so cheap that the industry does not even market it. So it's definitely cost effective. We don't need a cost effective analysis for that one. Then we create what we call strong recommendations, which is most or all, nearly all patients would want this, clear benefit, almost just do it. Or most recommendations become weak or conditional because there's a fine balance between benefits and harms, or there's low certainty of the evidence. So this is the grade system for creating evidence summaries and recommendations. Now, I love grade, obviously. I'm part of making grade the irresistible choice. And I was postdoc with Gordon Guyatt at McMaster 2009, 2010. And I spent a couple of years on antithrombotic therapy guidelines. We were 128 people across the world, spending 2 years just to update this particular guideline. When it came out, it was 600 recommendations, 900 pages of PDF. And I became increasingly frustrated because it's just not good enough. Like some of the comments from the audience, we cannot make use of this guideline in this format at the point of care. And it's extremely cost demanding. So all sorts of different groups in the world do this at the same time for the same questions, spend years to create one guideline, and it's out of date when we publish. We have all these problems. So we set up a list of problems back in 2010. Well, who cares if we create trustworthy guidelines if they're not available, useful, and understandable for clinicians like you? If you cannot get the recommendations into the electronic medical record, if that's where we work, if you cannot integrate recommendations into EBM textbooks, like Dynamed or UpToDate or others at the national level, and if we are not able to adapt an international guideline easily into a Brazilian guideline or a regional guideline in Brazil, well, it's just not good enough. Most recommendations are out of date for some topics when we publish because the new trials come so fast. And in these guidelines, 600 recommendations for hardcore cardiology thrombosis, 2/3 became weak. We suggest, think about the alternative. Obviously, the reason is a fine balance between reduction in strokes, increase in bleeds, etc. So we have to engage patients more in what we call shared decision making, and that's my topic for the talk tomorrow. No tools, so we created magic. And in short, we published papers on how we went forward with creating magic and what we call Magic App. But what we now have is a tool, an authoring and publication platform for evidence summaries, guidelines, and some of you have already used it, and I'm very impressed by how you made use of it. And it could also be used in training, which is something to discuss during this conference. What you do is to create the entire guideline in structured content in a database according to the grade system. Everything structured can be used across all topics, all populations for clinical questions. And then you're able to publish these guidelines in new user-friendly formats on all devices, offline, online. If you're now looking into it, it's magicapp.org. It's not an app in App Store, it's a new kind of app. But I'll show you examples how this looks like after a while. This has been done as research in a project called Decide from the Grade Working Group, so we know that clinicians like and understand these new formats at least better than what we compare them to, such as UpToDate. We can integrate recommendations in the electronic medical record linked to patient-specific data. We can much more easily adapt because the guideline is structured, so you go in and just adapt those pieces you need to adapt. We have new tools for shared decision makings that we will see examples of later, so I could share evidence with my patient's point of care. And lastly, but importantly, if there's new trials, new evidence, we just go in and update that particular question or recommendation or evidence summary. This is what we call living guidelines, a new concept for writing, publishing, and updating guidelines. And you'll see more examples of this during this day and tomorrow. as mentioned, we did this as part of the site, and also in collaboration with Gabrielle and Epistemonico. So there's a very nice collaboration at the international level to make these tools available for you, and also harmonize how guidelines look like at or across countries. Okay, so this is Share It, our new tools that I'll present in detail tomorrow. Idea is that the evidence we have about benefits and harms are already presented in absolute numbers. So we just visualize this to patients to create discussions between a clinician and a patient in a consultation. And we wrote a paper about this, but this is shortly how it looks like. You sit down with the patient decides what outcomes to focus on, and you can see we visualize in different ways this to the patient. Just a snapshot of our EMR in Norway, where the recommendations are in the EMR, and you see patient-specific information linked to the recommendation. I think I'll skip the demo of Magic App because it will be demoed afterwards. Just to give you a few snapshots of how this looks like. Back to this one. What would the recommendation be for meniscal tears and arthroscopic surgery? Well, we were a board of people creating a recommendation in Magic App, and we ended up with a strong recommendation against the surgery. No effect, large costs, potential risk for patients. This shows how we present recommendations first in the Magic App in patients with meniscal tears. We recommend not performing arthroscopic surgery. Benefits and harms in text, quality of evidence, preferences and values, and you can click to find the soft tables, the rationale, practical advice about how to do this, references, etc. I hope you all will go in and check this out during this conference. Now, let's summarize. We did this circle, right? And we found a strong recommendation against meniscectomy. Now, my biggest headache for these 13 years I've been working in evidence-based practice is that we're not really good at this last step. How do we implement and evaluate practice? And that's the quality improvement people now working in their silo. We have to somehow get around this problem. And we do indeed have some major challenges. Even though we've made advances in EBM, we still know that most of the evidence is lost from its production to its implementation. This is the broken evidence pipeline. There's this beautiful series of papers in the Lancet called Increasing Value, Reducing Waste in Research, showing that we do not do the right, most relevant research with high enough quality. Overdiagnosis, overtreatment is going to be discussed in this conference. Huge problem, I think, across most countries. And then all these quality and safety initiatives ongoing, where perhaps they did not look carefully enough at the evidence before they started, so we don't really know if we do more benefit than harm. Again, a result of us working in silos. This is an example of having people put on antibiotics within 4 hours when they entered American hospitals. Looking back, we don't really know if we did more benefit than harm to this huge quality improvement initiative. So, we can become depressed, like this former president of the US, or we could think some big thoughts and create some new solutions. And I really hope this is something that could happen in Brazil, namely the evidence ecosystem approach. And in short, it's a long objective, but we want to create a digital evidence ecosystem connecting people performing primary research, systematic reviews, guidelines, decision support systems, and quality improvement work, with digitally structured data in platforms such as Magic App, Epistemonico, and others, to facilitate creation, dissemination, and implementation of trustworthy evidence into clinical practice. So that's our objective. Thank you. Oh, sorry. I was told me there's 5 minutes left. So you're still stuck with me for 5 more minutes. Sorry. So how does this work? Let's look at these two examples. What about meniscus surgery? Well, trials, the evidence was in 2013. Took a year to do systematic review. Then nobody created the guidelines before we did, by coincidence, 2015. Strong recommendation against, and what happened? Nothing. This is where the Norwegian hospitals makes most of their money. So something called DRG codes. If they're going to stop this, they're going to lose a lot of money. The surgeons were interested in the beginning, now they're hiding from me. And again, we're silos of people. We're not working together. We already have the tool through the National Health Atlas to actually measure. If we now change practice, we could just launch another version of the Health Atlas and we can measure reduced variation in practice. So this is what we want to make happen in the evidence ecosystem. If we did this 1 year ago, we would save 100 million euros in Norway alone by now. It's a lot of money. We could spend on other more important causes. Steroids, well, what happened? New trial in Lancet 2015. We were a group of people through Gordon who said we're going to do a systematic review in 30 days and submit to a top journal. We did. Problem was it took 7 months to publish in Annals of Internal Medicine, so we lost some time. But we had the recommendation in Magic app, and you can see it online. We suggest use of steroids already in February 2015. Now, we can integrate these recommendations into structured electronic medical records. We could create decision aids. We have a decision aid for this one. And we could somehow also, and would need to, measure change in practice. This is what we want to make happen in Norway, Belgium, Finland. It's now in the proposal stage. And if you could pull it off in Brazil, and I think you could, because there are a lot of great people here, it's a new approach to evidence-based practice and its implementation. So if we did this in Norway by March 2015, very conservative estimate, 400 lives saved in little Norway by now. We're 5 million people. This matters to patients and society. Now, we're sick and tired of big organizations working too slow with lots of bureaucracy. So we launched a project called WikiRex. It's in its planning stage. And this steroids and pneumonia was an example of that. So we say if there's new, potentially practice-changing evidence, we'll do a systematic review in max 45 days, publish this systematic review and a recommendation on top of it after 60 days in a good journal and in Magic app and in other resources. And we have approached BMJ and said, well, this is what your one-page publication format of the recommendation plus evidence summary plus ISOF table could look like. And it remains to be seen if BMJ wants to partner with us, but this is just another way of being networks of people getting the work done to really make a difference for healthcare. We are now creating a Nordic ecosystem, so the Nordic health authorities are collaborating on guidelines through a large innovation project. And finally, take-home messages. Really happy to be here, also to listen to you and what you're doing. I think there have been huge advances in evidence-based healthcare. Technology will play a key role. We just have to make use of it in the right way. EBM is never enough. We have to establish links between the other communities trying to make a difference in healthcare. And the most important and most fun part of it all is this collaboration and a culture for sharing information. So thank you. I did it.